The year is 2022. Do you ever pause to realize that we're currently living in the future? And as teachers, our classroom totally reflects that. If I were to invite my grandmother to watch one of my classes, I think she'd be blown away. So let's step outside our box to recognize and appreciate the tools we have. And more importantly, let's identify the questions we should be asking ourselves to make sure we use those tools well. Because even though the future is cool and all, everything really comes down to one thing: a generations old tradition of it being all about the students. Recently, I had the honor to interview some experienced teachers about integrating technology into classes. Separately, I conducted a getting to know you survey with my own sixth graders. So we'll also explore how to connect teachers to students through technology. First, here are my classroom tech experts. My interviews were with Danica Wiley, who has a decade of teaching experience, primarily in grades 2 and 4. She also held leadership positions in the US and Korea. Sarah Schultz has 11 years of teaching experience, mainly in grades 1 through 3. She is currently a special areas media teacher and her school's PTA rep and an equity and diversity liaison. Jared Potgieter has 6 years of teaching experience. He has amassed several years with English language learners from kindergarten to high school and 2 years lecturing university students. Now let's move on to the focus of my talk, the students. I'll talk a bit about various grade levels along the way, but spoiler alert, my attention will be directed primarily at sixth graders today. Remember that student survey I told you about? These are the traits I was analyzing. And here's the long and short of it. My students are around 13 years old. They all live in an affluent area just outside Seoul, South Korea. My school is not unlike a cram school, and my students attend multiple other academies throughout the week. I learned many participate in various sports programs and the school's broadcast clubs. Here you can see my students' various interests. The most common were drawing, singing, and Netflix. And academically, my students consider their strengths in English to be speaking and writing. There is an almost equal balance between the literacies they'd like to improve: speaking, writing, and listening. Listening led the way slightly. You may notice that reading literacy had the lowest votes, so I see a major opportunity there. All of my students have access to tech at home, including smartphones and the internet. So my goal was to analyze all the information they gave me, along with the teacher's wisdom of integrating tech in the classroom. So let's jump in. One of the questions I asked the teachers was which technology devices and apps they found success with. So here are their responses. Do you recognize any? I learned of a few, like Accelerated Reader. This could be a great opportunity for students to boost not just their literacy skills, but their interests as well. According to understood.org, AR is usually used for elementary school students, but it's designed for grades K through 12, so middle school and high school students can gain from it too. And since it assesses students' reading level, enabling them to read independently at their own pace and level, I see it as a great tool for ELL and students with special needs. And as my students pointed out in their survey, a class element they really love is games. So I think that Kahoot will be an awesome activity to try with them in my own classroom. Sometimes the hardest workers are out of sight behind the scenes, and the same is true with tech. These are a few of the administrative software and apps that the teachers successfully implemented in their day-to-day for grading and parent communication. I'm always looking for the best practices to stay organized. You too, right? I want to point out Blooms, which Sarah recommended. It's amazing what it can do. You can communicate with parents while keeping your personal phone number private, and you can even post class pictures. All right. Now, we have all these amazing ideas of apps, software, and devices. So what do we do now, right? This is something that Danica said that I really appreciated. She said, tech resources and strategies are always a resource or tool, but they never guided my full lessons. So I think it's about the end result. It's not necessarily about the tool itself. Even though websites like Kahoot, Quizlet, and BrainPop can be valuable as gamification or visual aids, it was always best to tie them into tried and true teaching strategies like collaboration, hands-on practice, or class discussions. Because if you don't watch your step, you'll run into pitfalls. Tech needs to guide the teaching and not the other way around. There is total consensus on the things that can go wrong. Danica advised that if you have a new tech toy, it's best to preview it before class and get familiar with it. Also, teach the tech. Don't mistake the stereotype of youth being automatically familiar and adept with technology. There's a large potential for frustration and overstimulation. Jared had a great solution to this. Have a tech onboarding process so students have time to adjust. And depending on the ages you teach, you may need to adjust your instruction, but consider that even ELL and students with special needs may benefit from watching you navigate the tech. And finally, as we all know, tech is not perfect and doesn't play by our rules. How many times have you dealt with slow internet or something just plain old not working? As Sarah said, you always have to have a backup in case your technology fails, and trust me, it will. So we've talked about the pitfalls. Here are a few other pros and cons. The word that came up again and again is engaging. All the teachers agreed that tech can be a great tool or resource, but we can see that some of those pitfalls resurface here too in the cons. And for those of you teaching young ones, especially fourth grade and below, I'd like to highlight Sarah's wisdom. If students use too much tech, it can result in poor fine motor skills. If they don't spend as much time doing things like writing and cutting, she's been noticing poor handwriting in her classes. Instant gratification can also reduce stamina, so just something to keep in mind. Now, there was a nice overlap along the ways tech can be utilized for improving learning experiences for both ELL and students with special needs. Things like having the audio read aloud can be helpful for the hard of hearing or for ELL students learning pronunciation. Danica told me of a website where an AI voice can read to you in different accents, so that's valuable for language learners. And things like subtitles, the ability to increase text size using different color overlays, those are all great. Now, when I asked the teachers about their dream techie classroom, everyone said their student would have their own device and a smart board that linked to those devices. So let's blend their wisdom and my students' needs. Why don't I utilize YouTube more in my classroom? I can show videos relevant to their interests like music and TV and engage them in listening practice. Then they can work in discussion groups to create wins between their strengths in speaking and their opportunities in listening. Also, to adjust writing, one idea is to assign writing tasks in Google Classroom through which they can also attach drawings. They can use the autocorrect to self-check their grammar, and I can come in with the final sweep. Then they could present their assignments and quiz each other on what they've read to further their listening. So we're living in the future, you guys, but it strikes me that the future has just begun.